Sure. I'm opposed to that. So I'm not going to say all that call to action stuff. You are. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for our very first business luncheon of the 2021-2022 year. We are all so very excited to have you here today, and my name is Emily Parks. I am the chapter president for this term, and as you will see throughout this morning's events, we are going to rise together this year. It takes all of us working together for our greatest success. There are so many opportunities ahead of us this year. We are going to open today with just some welcomes of some awesome people who are here in the room with us. And let's start by thanking our members as well as our guests for being here. And as we go through these welcomes this morning, you'll notice on your Zoom screen, down at the bottom of your screen, you've got a ribbon of options. One of those options is reactions. So as we talk about something that applies to you, I encourage you to go to your reactions and raise your hand so that every one of us here can acknowledge the fact that you are a rock star in that particular group of attendees today. So anyone who is a chapter member, you will please go and hit that reaction to raise your hand, because we all know that you have a lot of choices regarding where you invest your time, your energy, your brain power, and of course your funds. So we are grateful that you choose to engage with and support the mission of the National Association of Women Business Owners. We strive to make this a winning experience for each of you, and we're so glad that you're here today. So thank you very much to each of our members, and also welcome to any of our guests. If you are a guest here today, please make sure to include your introduction in the chat for everyone to see and learn a little bit more about you. And please, everyone, stay tuned till the end, because we will have plenty of time for networking in our breakout rooms towards the end of today's luncheon. And it'll be a great time for all of our members and guests to get to know each other, follow up a little bit about the content during today's program, and make sure that we're cultivating those relationships with our NAWBO sisters, NAWBROs, and community supporters. Then also, I want to recognize any service members who are here today. Whether you are a current or retired member of our Air Force, Army, Coast Guard, Marines, National Guard, or Navy, please make sure that you raise your hand at this time so that we can acknowledge you for your service. And thank you so much for what you do to make our country the best. So thank you for your service. I would also like to recognize the members of our public sector. So any public sector officials or candidates that we have in the room. I know we have State Senator Jeff Jackson joining us today, and I heard mention of a couple of other folks that might be joining us. So please make sure that you hit that reaction and raise your hand. And then we would also like to recognize our corporate partners. So right now on the screen, you will see the logos for each of these amazing business partners who have stepped up and made a commitment to us for the entire year to support NAWBO's mission, to engage with our membership, and to be a supporter of women business owners, our success in this workplace, in this world, and across the entire globe. So thank you so very much to each of our corporate partners. And one of those corporate partners I would like to call your attention to right now. Karina Lemons of the Lemons Law Firm will be sharing with us briefly this morning.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning, good morning. I'm Karina Lemons of the Lemons Law Firm. I'm here in my office working. Sometimes I work remotely, but mostly I work from here. I practice in the areas of employment and entertainment law. And what I love doing the most is providing wise counsel. And so I advise employees and small business owners, employers in the areas of employment and labor law. One of the most pressing issues right now and concerns with employees is the employer mandated vaccine so I can answer any questions that you may have. As a member of NAWBO Greater Raleigh chapter, you are entitled to a free 30-minute consultation with me. So please take advantage of that benefit. And thank you for your time. Again, Karina Lemons of the Lemons Law Firm.
Thank you so very much, Karina, for your support of our Greater Raleigh chapter for the National Association of Women Business Owners, but also your willingness to give for your NAWBO sisters as well as the NAWBROs here to make us better and better equip us for the legal challenges that we may face. So thank you very much. I would also like to recognize today's event sponsors. It is thanks to North Raleigh and Carrie Flores that we are able to have this wonderful luncheon for you here over Zoom. And I apologize, I wish that we could be together, but unfortunately, the world is putting up some barriers to that at this moment in time. We will be back together in person as soon as possible. And thankfully, North Raleigh and Carrie Flores have provided us with a great sponsorship to make today's luncheon go smoothly and provide great value for each of you. So thank you so very much to North Raleigh and Carrie Flores, and stay tuned for a little surprise later in our program today where you'll get to see some of the goodies that North Raleigh and Carrie Flores provide to their customers day in and day out. I will say I am one of their regular customers, and one of the best investments I make in myself is to get a weekly delivery from North Raleigh Florist that I can sit right there on my desk, and it's just a great source of self-care, but also joy as I come into my office each day. So thank you very much, North Raleigh and Carrie Flores, for your continued support of NAWBO Greater Raleigh. And then that brings me to recognition of our community partners. We are so grateful for the business-focused nonprofits in our area that make sure that we have resources at our disposal as women business owners to carry out our company's missions and to fulfill the needs of growing our business, running our business, meeting our clients' needs the most efficiently and effectively possible. Those community partners include SCORE, SBA, and the Women's Business Center. So please make sure that you reach out to these wonderful resources and utilize what trainings and great brains that they offer to make your business better. And then last but not least for today's recognitions, I really want to highlight our board of directors. As most of you are aware, our board of directors is filled with volunteers. These are people who give freely of their time to make sure that this chapter runs smoothly, to make sure that we as the volunteer leadership team are meeting your needs as our members, our guests, and our community supporters. And it is through their time, talents, blood, sweat, and tears that we are able to provide you with great value, whether it be through programs or professional development or our public policy efforts, or even the networking that happens between different members supporting one another. So please help me recognize first our president-elect, who is Shannon Madrid, our immediate past president, who is Carnella Hill, our treasurer, who is Jess McLam, our secretary, who is Carletha Ward, our director of membership, who is Holly Van Apeldoorn, our director of public policy, who is Terry Dunn, our co-directors of corporate partners, who are Catherine Burnett and Renee Massey, our chair of programs, who is Julie Navarra, and our chair of professional development, who is Penny McGee. You'll be hearing throughout the program from various members of our board of directors, but these women are at your disposal to reach out to us with questions, concerns, ideas, needs. We have an open door policy where we want you to bring us your thoughts, your concerns, and hopefully with each concern that you bring to us, you bring how you would suggest that we solve it so that we can come up with a plan that will meet the needs of the majority of our membership. We appreciate you as members and guests being here, and I truly appreciate the support of our board of directors. And speaking of our board of directors, I would like to transition to our director of membership, Holly Van Apeldoorn.
Thank you, Emily. I am Holly Van Apeldoorn. I am the Director of Membership. And as many of you know, we just kicked off our membership drive. For those of you who join now between now and October 31st, you'll save $45 on your enrollment. Plus, you get a chance to win one of the 12 NAWBO National Business Spotlights that they're going to do a drawing for. For our current members, if you refer at least 5 new members between at any time this year, you will get a free virtual ticket to the upcoming Women's Business Conference. So if you do it before this one, you'll get a ticket to this year. If you do it after, you'll get a ticket to next year's. If you're interested in learning more about NAWBO or have some friends that you think might benefit from joining, then you'll want to join us at our Get to Know NAWBO event, which is on October 7th at 6 p.m. at Bowstring Pizza and Brew Yard in Raleigh. You can register for this event and more at nawbo-raleigh.org. Thank you.
Good morning. NAWBO Greater Raleigh. What can we say when we talk about public policy? We can say we're not Democrats or Republicans. We can say that when we stand as a united voice, we are NAWBO. The bill that changed everything for women business owners, HR 50/50. Virginia Littlejohn once said, HR 50/50 truly was the Big Bang. It transformed the landscape for women's entrepreneurship. Today, it seems incomprehensible to think that simple act of financial independence, like obtaining business credits under your own name, were denied to our mothers, grandmothers, and sisters. HR 50/50 was game-changing legislation. U.S. Representative John LaFace authored HR 50/50, and President Ronald Reagan signed it into law in the Rose Garden ceremony on October 25th, 1988. It truly was the Big Bang, says Littlejohn. It transformed the landscape for women's entrepreneurship. Among its many provisions, HR 50/50 eliminated state laws requiring women to have a male relative or a husband co-sign a business loan. One of our witnesses for the HR 50/50 hearing didn't have a husband, a brother, a living father available, so her 17-year-old son had to co-sign the loan for her. The stupidity of this really surprised the House Small Business Committee and propelled us to put forward the language to change this into legislation. It is important to remember the foresight and perseverance of many women who advocated for passage of the Women's Business Ownership Act. The NAWBO members and colleagues who helped to draft this landmark legislation and lobbied Congress to make it a reality were true visionaries. It is difficult to even imagine the nation's economy and culture today without the proliferation of women-owned businesses and the goods, services, jobs, and other advancements that they and the women they empowered have created or driven since 1988. Female businesses have made great strides over the last 33 years, thanks in part to the passage of HR 50/50. Female business leaders and policymakers sound off the progress and next steps needed to keep moving the needle forward. Greater NAWBO, Greater Raleigh NAWBO. Who are we? We are NAWBO. I am Terry Dunn, Chair of Public Policy.
Oh, hi, NAWBO. It is hard to follow that. Terry, thank you so much for sharing that. There is nothing like starting with that reminder of where we've been as a chapter. As so many of you know, the legislation that Terry just talked about when it passed under the Reagan administration, this chapter was around for 10 years before that. There were women in this chapter who directly advocated for the changes that Terry highlighted today. And who knows, maybe the things that we're talking about today, future chapters are going to talk about what we pushed forward. So let's get started. Welcome to NAWBO Greater Raleigh's September Business Luncheon. This is Infrastructure as the Great Economic Equalizer. What an awesome title. I'm Sarah Glova. I'm a past president of NAWBO Greater Raleigh, and I'm the CEO of Reify Media. And today, we are championing for the long-term success of women business owners. And we're going to do that by approaching a critical conversation, infrastructure. We're going to talk about infrastructure that supports our businesses. And we're going to look beyond traditional infrastructure, like roads and bridges. And we're going to talk about things like access to broadband, access to capital and finance, and even access to childcare. Now, if this sounds a little bit different, a little bit new, let's just remember that HR 5050, as Terry said, was game-changing legislation when it passed in the late 80s. So let's see what kind of game-changing legislation we can talk about today. We want to thank you, our chapter members and our guests, for attending today's event. We'll invite you to share your questions in the chat, please. We'll be monitoring that during today's event, and we're also going to give you the opportunity to share your feedback through polls during today's discussion. Now, what we're going to do now is share a link to all of the panelists' bios. We have one of our public policy chapter committee members is going to share a link to all of those bios in the chat. That way you can click and learn more about each of our panelists. But we're also going to learn a little bit about them now through a quick introduction and what we like to call an icebreaker question. So for our icebreaker question, we're going to ask each of our panelists, what's something exciting that you're working on right now? The first panelist I'm going to point us to is Annette Taylor. She's the vice chair of the North Carolina Council for Women and Youth Involvement, a member of the Andrea Harris Task Force focused on economic, social, environmental, and health equity. And she's an advisory board member for the Women Business Center of North Carolina. Annette, welcome. Please tell us what's something that you're working on.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for this invitation. You did catch me off guard with that. I'm working on so many exciting things. I'm just trying to figure out how to narrow it down. I'll just go with a brief one because some others may come up. I am actually working on a diversity initiative through my organization, the North Carolina Education Lottery, focusing on business owners and individuals with diverse abilities, with disabilities, a mentoring initiative with HBCUs and HBCU students, partnering with corporations and possibly business owners like you all. So you may be hearing from me. So I'm establishing a mentoring program starting right there at the North Carolina Education Lottery so that we can help students who graduate that need access to opportunities because we cannot forget that our folks with disabilities have talents as well. So that's something that I'm very excited about moving forward at the North Carolina Education Lottery.
That is a great one for us to start with, Annette. We can have a whole nother event talking about that. Hopefully it'll come up even more today. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you so much for being here today. Next, we're going to introduce Maggie Woods, who's the Policy and Program Manager at the Institute for Emerging Issues, fondly called IEI, and the Director of Band NC, a digital inclusion program. Maggie, welcome. We are so glad to have you. Can you tell us about something you're working on?
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, everyone. I'm so excited to be here and to share this virtual stage with this fantastic group of women. I can't tell you how thrilled I am to be speaking next to these wonderful women. I'm really excited because I get to go out every day and talk to communities and business leaders and councils of government and teachers about digital inclusion and digital equity every single day. And that's what I get to do for a job. And so I'm just excited about the work that I'm doing. We're currently working to help counties develop strategic strategies around digital inclusion. So develop digital inclusion plans, which we can talk more about. And we need business leaders to be a part of that. So I'm excited to tell you all about that today. I'll also say my newest venture is that I have a 6-month-old. So I'm really excited about the conversation today too, to talk about childcare and how we can support women and families to have richer lives that include career and family. So thanks for having me today.
That's so great, Maggie. We're so glad that you're here and can't wait to talk about some of those initiatives with you. You have baby pictures to share later. I mean, we won't hate that, just saying. We also have Cheryl Cherry with us today. So Cheryl is Managing Director for Corner Square Community Capital and the North Carolina Rural Center's SSBCI programs. SSBCI stands for State Small Business Credit Initiative. Cheryl, thank you for being here. Can you tell us what's something that you're working on?
Sure. Thank you so kindly. It's a pleasure to be here. And like you were saying, I'm part of the SSBCI program. And so if many may not know, but it all started with the Obama administration and the stimulus relief package that was rolled out. The state of North Carolina was fortunate to receive 46 mil during that round. And we are tapping up and gearing up for round 2 that was put forth with the Biden administration. So we're getting $120 million coming in, which will impact the state tremendously. And that includes women led organizations. And so we're looking to actually put more towards women, rural areas, minorities, things of that nature. So be on the lookout for more information. We're just waiting on the final guidelines from the Treasury.
That is awesome. And we are so excited to talk about that today as part of this discussion about the infrastructure that supports businesses. So Cheryl, thank you for being here. And finally, our 4th panel member, we have Kia Edwards, the Connectivity and Solutions Manager for the NC Office of Digital Equity and Literacy. So Kaya, thank you for joining us. What's something that you're working on?
Hello. Good morning, everyone. I am Kaya Edwards, and I'm the Connectivity and Solutions Manager. Thank you, NAWBO, for having me and allowing me to speak on behalf of the Office of Digital Equity and Literacy and putting me on a panel with such great women. So our office is relatively new. We just launched in July. So an exciting thing that we're working on is actually establishing a framework for our office. Our goal is to connect about 98% of North Carolina households across the state to broadband infrastructure. And our office is the country's first system level effort to actually get this done. So we are working hard with partners like Maggie Woods and IEI to make sure this is happening. So we're excited to get the work done and meet all of you at some point to make sure we're doing the right thing and moving the path forward. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I think today we're going to get to hear how your office, Kaya, and how Maggie's work at IEI, how there's an intersection there. Really excited. And then again, for anyone who hasn't met me, my name is Sarah. We've added links into the chat so that you can click onto these panelists' profiles and learn more about them or connect with them on social. Please also remember you can use today's chat to start adding some questions as we go along. Let's dive into our panel. So for our first question, Annette, I'm going to throw this one to you. I'd love to ask you to help me celebrate for a moment. We're talking with a room full of women business owners and their supporters. I know that you know, with your background on the NC Council for Women and your experience with the Women's Business Center for North Carolina, women business owners have an incredible impact on our economy and communities. So when you think about this topic, infrastructure that supports business owners, specifically women business owners, what comes to mind for you?
Thank you for that question. I do actually want to celebrate with you. I want to celebrate all the women business owners in the room. I want to applaud those business owners who have been able to pivot, who are still surviving and thriving during the pandemic, because we are still in an economic crisis, folks. We have not recovered yet. So, I do want to celebrate all of you, and I appreciate being here with all of you again. Well, it's hard not to initially think about the supply chain issues that women business owners deal with. It's hard not to want to say that because so much affects that. The transportation crisis affected it. But when we kind of bring this back around to the other components that women business owners have dealt with, I would say the access to capital. You mentioned it earlier. We're going to have a longer conversation about it. But from actually a personal point of view, I know that minority women business owners really struggled with even accessing the PPP loan. And now, of course, there's a fight for, relieving folks of those loans. So, and continuing that assistance through the ARP. So I would say access to capital is something that comes to my mind when I think about women business owners.
Well, and that was such a great response, Annette, because right off the bat, you're highlighting why we wanted to have this event, why we wanted to have this discussion. As you started off your answer, we heard the mention of some things that I know I would think of when I think of traditional infrastructure, things like transportation costs, which can go up if there's not good road or bridge infrastructure, or good access. Talking about things like supply chain. But then as you were talking, kind of walking us through some other things that you've seen, then we start to hear additional things like access to capital. So today we're really opening up what we think of when we think about that term infrastructure. And building off that, I think it's clear that when we're going to talk about infrastructure these days, it's about more than roads and bridges. So Maggie, a lot of the work that you're doing right now is focused on broadband infrastructure. Many of us attending today are lucky to have access to pretty great internet. You can see me, right? That means we have pretty great internet. But I wanted to ask you, Maggie, how the state is doing overall. Before we jump in, though, we're going to poll our audience. So we're going to ask our audience to respond to a poll and let us know how important broadband is to you, to your business. You're going to see a poll question pop up here in a second that asks how important the internet access is to your business. Oh, I can see it here. Amazing. Amazing. What a great team. So as you respond to that question, we're going to want to hear, is the internet access vital? You couldn't run your business without it. Somewhat important. You rely on the internet, but you can live without it. Or is it not important? So Maggie, as our audience clicks, let me ask you, how would you say North Carolina is doing? Connectivity isn't necessarily the same across the state, is it?
No, it's not. And we're doing okay. When you look at our numbers compared to national numbers, we're about average, a little above average. We know that about 266,000 households, so close to 1 million people in North Carolina, lack access to the internet. And when I say internet access, I mean they lack the cables in the ground, they lack the fiber to their home, so that even if they wanted internet, they could not get it. 266,000 households is a lot. We know it's significantly more than that because the data that exists on this is really poor. It comes from the FCC, and we can dive into that if y'all are interested. But we know that it's at least 266,000 households. But I do want to note that there are several barriers to even getting to that infrastructure, right? As we talk about different elements of infrastructure today, one of those barriers is affordability. So there are more people in North Carolina who don't have internet because they can't afford it, as there are people who don't have internet because they cannot access it. We also know a huge barrier is access to a device that meets your needs. We're all here on our computers or laptops. A lot of people in the state, something like 450,000 people in the state, do not have a computer or laptop that meets their needs. And of course, we also need to think about digital literacy, digital skills. If you don't have the digital skills in order to use that computer or device or to use the internet, this whole point is moot. And so it's not just access to the infrastructure, it's all of these other elements that really affect digital inclusion and digital equity, which is why I am so excited Kaya's office exists, and so excited to be working with her and her fabulous team, which is the first office in the country on digital equity.
Wow, that's so powerful. And as we're seeing in the poll, I'm looking at the results now, we're seeing an incredible response. Most of our participants, an overwhelming most, are saying that connectivity is absolutely vital to what they're doing. So we know that this is a crucial conversation. Maggie, you're helping us so much here with this reminder. When we talk about broadband as infrastructure, I know that I might have previously thought about fiber in the ground, the kind of traditional infrastructure that we can see going into the ground, being installed, if you will. But we also need to think about access to devices, affordability, digital literacy. And so as we're expanding that conversation, something I want for the women business owners in the room for us to bring in, we know that it's not just us as business owners who need access to the internet, but our customers. Maggie mentioned 266,000 households, potentially over 1 million people, and that's low estimates. Our customers, we need to have them have access to the internet. That way they can have access to us. So Kaya, with your role as Connectivity and Solutions Manager for the NC Office of Digital Equity and Literacy, can you talk with us a little bit about the opportunity that our state would see from connecting all these communities across the state? What could that look like?
Of course. So as Maggie mentioned, about 1/3 of the households across the state do not have access to what we call digital abundance. And that's being able to tap into that affordability piece, that adoption piece, as well as the accessibility piece. So our office is focusing on launching innovative connectivity hubs, which are essentially community assets that are underutilized. We want to step into spaces and create job skills training, digital literacy training, any type of asset that you can think up to help people advance. And when we think about this pandemic, how many people got left behind, not only in remote learning, in telehealth, in working from home. All of these issues are the reason why the Office of Digital Equity and Literacy exists. We have partners on the ground who are doing this work, and it's our job to convene and make sure that we're not only eliminating duplicity, but also bringing awareness to the issues that are prevalent and the offices that are trying to solidify the work. We're proud to be bringing all of this work together, and we know that if we are able to connect communities across the state, the possibilities are endless. Think about the people who are interested in launching a new business, but they don't have the broadband infrastructure to do so or the tools to do so. Think of the connectivity hubs as a way for you to learn those new skills so you can advance yourself and actualize your full potential.
That's amazing. And you know, something that you just said, Kaya, there about possibilities are endless. I remember reading a book once about what it was like when electricity became accessible to more homes. And that took a lot of infrastructure, right? And it actually looked at it from a small business perspective about the number of products that were available. How before electricity was widely available across a state like North Carolina, you might be able to find a couple lamps, but since not a lot of homes had electricity, there wasn't a lot of options out there. But then once that groundwork was put in, once electricity was more available, there were so many more products. And so when we talk about this possibility for access to more customers, more people being able to participate in this economy, it's going to be a similar boom to like what we saw with electricity. And I think we can all see the effects and how quickly that changed the economy. So I'm just really excited about some of the new terms that I'm learning. Digital abundance is a new one for me, so that's a powerful one to keep in our pockets. The idea of these hubs and what that project could mean, but also this reminder that the pandemic widened this divide like it did for a lot of other divides. So a reminder to our participants, please remember to put some questions in the chat as you have them. We've focused a bit on broadband here as part of the beginning of our conversation, but something else we wanted to touch on with you was this idea of business financing and the idea of financing as infrastructure. So let's try another poll here. So audience, we're going to ask you to respond to a poll and let us know what kind of financing tools you've leveraged for your business specifically. So the poll question is going to come up. It has things like term loans, SBA loans, lines of credit. And the reason we're asking that is we're just curious. What are the kinds of tools that you've leveraged? And as you're clicking, I'm going to ask Cheryl a question here. So Cheryl, the programs that you manage at the NC Rural Center and at Corner Square Community Capital, Those are the programs that support lending partners like community banks and CDFIs or community development financial institutions. So based on your work with these lending partners and your experience in the banking industry, would you consider access to financing a part of business infrastructure?
Absolutely. It is definitely critical. Without access to capital, and I know Annette touched on this when she spoke, but access to capital is a huge driving force for businesses to thrive. Most of the times they start up with their own means, very small at times, but then when it's time for growth, they don't have that equity to inject for that expansion. And so being the researcher that I am with data, I looked up some information and I like numbers. So according to a Forbes article from 2019, it showed that only 2.2% of women-led organizations were able to access $130 billion. It's like $130 billion industry for venture capitalists that year. We only were able to access 2.2%. That was an improvement. I know that's a small number, but it was an improvement from 2017 because 2017, it was $1 billion less. So imagine that, right? And so being the person I am, I looked again, and in 2019, it went up just slightly. When you look at just having one female-led, female founder in the organization, it went up to 17%, but then again, it dropped right back down when you just look at female-led organizations, it's back to 2%. So we have a long ways to go. And I know with debt financing, those numbers are a little better, about 24%. But if you want to start up and you want to expand, then capital is definitely necessary.
Absolutely. It is so incredible to hear some of these numbers, Cheryl. And this is the first time I've heard you speak on this in this way. It's a little bit infuriating. So I feel a little bit angry about it, but also motivated. And something I want to remind us here is that beautiful introduction that Terry did to help us set the stage. Again, HR 5050 passed in the late 80s. And before that, there were women testifying before Congress about how they had to get their high school age son to help them sign on business documents. So as we talk about women-led businesses seeking financing, it's really not that many generations before us that women probably didn't consider those traditional financing structures because they weren't as accessible to them. So it's going to take some time for us to turn that around. But I think we're at the point, and so many of the women leaders that I've met through NAWBO are examples of being beyond that point of women businesses accessing financing. And we're seeing some results in the poll. It does look like there are some examples of tools that women in our organization have pursued. So we're going to share the results of this poll in more detail after the event. But we also see that there are some women who responded that they weren't interested or that they were interested and haven't done this yet. So I think it's a conversation we need to continue pushing forward and talking about these tools. I also love, Cheryl, I don't want to forget this point that you made about growth. So many women businesses and women business owners, we're real scrappy. And so we can pull these businesses together in the beginning based, making them self-funded or growing on small resources. But once those businesses are successful and they're ready to jet to that next level, as you mentioned, that's when financing becomes key. And we want to be an organization that helps women get to that next level. So thank you for bringing this to us today. As we think about how financing is a tool to get women to that next level, I'm feeling like it's pretty key under this infrastructure umbrella. Maggie, I want to point to you here as well, because you've done work, as you mentioned, your job, you get to go out into these communities across the state. So just wanted to ask if you had anything to add to Cheryl's comments here based on some things you've seen as you've explored our state.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll say that we tend to work more with, say, small community-based organizations or nonprofits, churches, and many of them are women-owned, women-led. And so often the biggest challenge that they have is they don't have operating costs. They have costs to run their programs, but they don't have they don't have money to pay their people in order to run those programs. And if we're trying to create infrastructure to create infinite opportunities, you have to be able to pay people. And these are people who are on the ground doing the work. And so that's what we come across the most as we tour the state and as we talk to communities.
And Sarah, I'd like to add something too, if you don't mind.
Absolutely not. Please go ahead.
Not to take you off, but as you speak about motivation, I did just want to add a comment that I'd like for women business owners to be more motivated about doing research, because part of the issue, I believe, is that they lack the faith and confidence that they'll be able to qualify for these loans, or they don't have their paperwork in order. They haven't been in business long enough. There are so many barriers that affected women. And I mean, Cheryl maybe can speak to this, at another time or as we go on, but I did want to bring that up as one of the issues. And I think women need to seek ways to connect with organizations, even like NAWBO, that shares this type of information. It's all about access to information. And then the nonprofits that are helping women with these organizations with these resources should do more outreach or do better outreach to reach them. And I think that's part of the issue, is women don't always know what's available to them, especially if they have certain barriers.
And I've seen examples of that in NAWBO, but before I share more, Annette, that was so helpful. Maggie, Cheryl, and Kia, did y'all have anything to add to that point?
Well, of course I do. That is indeed true. I will echo that. And a lot of it is just the hesitation because of your insecurity with having to seek, help. And so naturally, us women, we just really shy away from asking for a whole lot of help because we are very independent and, you don't want to show any vulnerability. But in this case, this is the time to say, hey, I need help. Please, share the knowledge that you have, what resources are out there. And we do look for resources. Don't get me wrong, we do look for resources, but oftentimes we have our own interpretation and ways of doing things. And so that kind of, steers us in the wrong direction, or we think if we leverage funds with a bank or another institution, then, I'm having to sacrifice and give up everything I've worked for, this is my money. I don't want to lose my house and other things like that. But there are other programs out there, such as Corner Square Capital. And I didn't talk about Corner Square, but we were started for that very reason, to inject the equity that's needed to pour into your business or as you grow to make it even better. So you just need to know what programs are out there. And that was very, very relevant when it came to the PPP lending last year. So I was with Self-Help Credit Union during that time. And our women-led organizations, their structures just were not in order. They didn't have the necessary capacity. They kept putting off hiring a bookkeeper or an accountant or other resources. And so they show a lot of losses on their tax returns, not understanding I need to show my profit. And so it impacted them, their ability to leverage that money in a way that other businesses were able to.
That's fascinating, because I think in a lot of ways, those are probably the organizations that needed the help the most, but just not having that structure in place. And I wrote down something that you said, Cheryl, because again, this is something that might, for me, it feels a little bit infuriating, like, oh, we gotta get past this. But there's a lot of inspiration to be had in what you said about women and that idea of hesitation when we talk about it in this group together. Because for me, NAWBO has been a source to help remove that hesitation. Many of you know Jess McLam. She's been the chapter's the chapter's treasurer for a number of years now. And I was meeting with her a few years ago, and it came out in the conversation that I didn't have a business line of credit. And just as you were saying, I was kind of hedging, like, I don't think I need that. I don't want to get that. And she, at the time, knew about some big projects I had, and she reached across the table and said, the time to get a line of credit is not when you need a line of credit. And I mean, I think I went out that week and talked to my banker because I just hadn't thought of it that way. And sure enough, That line of credit is a tool that we leverage all the time to help us as we manage cash flow for major projects and need to pay contractors before invoices come in. So just an example there of we can get frustrated when we hear this discussion about, women don't seek financing, or there's things that we need to change about the culture of money and how women talk about it. But there's inspiration too, especially as we look at groups like NAWBO and what you talked about with the Corner Square Capital projects and things like that. All right, I want to keep us moving. I love this discussion about financing though. So another reminder to our participants, if you have any questions about this topic, please go ahead and add them to the chat. I'm going to ask if our administrator can help me keep an eye on time because I can't see the clock from here, but I do want to make sure we talk about another topic. And Annette, I'm going to toss this one to you because something we want to touch on a bit is childcare. So the new infrastructure bills that are being discussed in the legislature, they're bringing about this discussion of childcare as infrastructure, and would just love to hear your thoughts on that. I will say one of the organizations that we sometimes partner with, this Families Forward North Carolina, has even proposed that childcare subsidies need to be seen in North Carolina, and there's some bipartisan support for that. So Annette, would love to hear your thoughts.
My thought is that it's necessary. We are in a childcare crisis. We were actually in a childcare crisis before the pandemic. As we know, COVID really just unmasked the disparities. I really don't have to go that heavy into the low wages that our childcare providers, as well as our early childhood education providers, and so I think it's very important. I mean, I'm all for universal pre-K. And so as a part of the social policy plan that, our president is pushing, I think it's very important that there is some component. Childcare is infrastructure. We know that women and women businesses, suffer. And actually, if a woman business owner is a childcare provider, she's most likely experiencing shortages right now, not to mention the healthcare issues that her providers have had. So I'll just kind of stop there because this is a long conversation.
In additional costs to kind of suit the current COVID protocols, absolutely. And I mentioned there's some bipartisan support for this. So just recently, North Carolina has established an early childhood caucus. So with organizations from both the North Carolina House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats, looking, as what you called, Annette, there, at this childcare crisis, and also this idea that early education, pre-K, is a huge investment that can help us save costs later on other programs. And so that's something that we're seeing being discussed in communities. And Kaya, I just wanted to ask, you've been in a lot of communities as well. So anything you wanted to add relevant to this conversation?
I would say that our office, having the word equity in the title is what it's all about. Equity equals intentionality. We discuss all of these issues that became prevalent during the COVID-19 pandemic and even before, but recognizing that one size fits all solutions do not work. Equity is about being intentional and going into communities and recognizing that there are disparities. So many underrepresented and underserved groups that we have to be vigilant in doing the work to make sure we are meeting the needs of the constituents. So we have to be intentional with the solutions that we curate because equity is about intentionality. So to that point, I would just say that all of these issues that we're developing or that we're discussing are things that the Office of Digital Equity and Literacy are going to be focusing on and making sure that we're connecting with community partners who are doing the work to maximize that abundance piece that we discussed before.
Absolutely. And I want to borrow your word. I want to be intentional here as we talk about childcare as one of these tools and highlight that we're not talking about childcare just because we're a woman business owner focused organization. We understand that women business owners are not a homogenous group. Not all women business owners are worried about childcare in the same way, and it might not be an issue that's relevant directly to many women business owners. However, as we look at the economic impact of childcare, the number of women who can remain in the workforce and what that does for our economy, what that does for our talent pool, then it does become an issue that's relevant to all business owners, male and female business owners, and especially to an organization like ours that's concerned about seeing more women rise as women business owners. So we want to be intentional there about this discussion and call out that we're not just talking about it because NAWBO members might have children. It's so much bigger than that. It's this idea that childcare is a huge supporter of our economy because of how many people it allows to be in the workforce successfully. So I want to call that out there. I'll turn it to our panelists real quick to see if anybody has any other comments about this one.
Yeah, Sarah, I think you're exactly right. It's about the economic impact of women and families leaving the workforce if they have children. And we know that the pandemic has pushed particularly women out of the workforce by the millions. And that should be a red flag for everyone, every single business owner, every single public policy official. And this is where policy can really play a role. And we can really think about, how do you create more flexibility for people as we emerge from the pandemic? How do you not go back to business as usual? How do you create more remote work options? How do you create flexible schedules? Brookings Institute, and I can put it in the chat, just did a really interesting report on supporting the new middle class. And one of their recommendations is to create a sabbatical program that's paid through Social Security, where you could take a sabbatical mid-career, either to reskill or perhaps to take care of children or families. And so you are not penalized for leaving the workforce. You can pull on your Social Security. It means that you would retire a little bit later, but that you have an economic safety net so that you can support your family and then go back into the workforce. And so I think now is the time to really be talking about those kinds of creative solutions so that we don't have a continued economic crisis on our hands.
Absolutely. And then as we talk about, as you put it, this new middle class, for so many of us as women business owners, we depend on the success of that middle class for our vendors, for our customers. So many of our businesses depend on the success of that. And so as we think about how NAWBO can be in this public policy space, a big thing that we can do is to help champion some of these causes, some of these unique structures, like this idea of a sabbatical that relies on the Social Security infrastructure that we already have. It's a fascinating discussion. And we can come together as a chapter and decide which policies we want to help amplify to both the state and federal legislature. That way they know that these are issues that concern us as women business owners. And that's a big part of what this public policy committee wants to help do. And as Terry outlined beautifully in the beginning, it's not a Republican or a Democratic position. It's something where we're coming together to specifically champion policies that we feel like affect us. So really appreciate that. And then as we talk about this from an economic impact, I do want to hear, Cheryl, since you work with so many community banks, lending partners, and again, just these communities all over, I just want to ask in general if some of the topics that we're discussing today are relevant to these organizations that you're working with. Has our discussion included some of the biggest challenges or concerns that you've seen from them through your work?
Definitely. I would think everything that has been discussed is relevant because it's not just a one size fits all, as well as it's not just a one issue. It kind of it's like a ecosystem, whereas one thing is continuously evolving and impacting the other in the supply chain when you think about it. So the life cycle is what I meant to say. But overall, the challenges, indeed, it's just more women being able to access the capital, more women standing up and taking that leap. And I love what you said, Sarah, with regards to getting the capital before you need it, reaching out before it becomes an issue. So, you just have it in your tool belt as a resource. You don't necessarily have to draw off of it, or anything like that, but at least you can leverage it in time. And that's what most companies and corporations do. They have these things in place. Whereas if there is an emergency, that you will be able to use it without any fault or anything, and you pay it right back. And so someone mentioned about the whole operating costs and expenses, and that's with your whole cash flows. And again, if you have those lines of credits available, or having the resources, I think someone put in the chat about the Women's Business Center. Go ahead and get familiar with those places with SCORE. Have the conversations before you need it, as opposed to when you're in a crisis and having to react and panicky. And we get emotional as women, so we can't think as well when we're cloudy. But just really, and I'm not generalizing anything, I'm just trying to make it so that we can all relate. But you just want to make sure that you have things in order before it gets to a crisis stage.
Absolutely. I love that, Cheryl. And maybe we can even revise our earlier statement about financing, which we said, the time to get financing isn't when you need it. We can say that about our network too. The time to build your network is not when you need your network. The time to build your network is now, so that later, as you have those questions or as you need that support, you have people you can go to. And I know for me, there are a number of people that I can talk to in the NAWBO organization. If I have a question about my business, I remember the first time I had to fire someone, I think I talked to maybe 3 different NAWBO members about, how to do that and what advice they had. And the time to have those phone calls isn't the time to build that network and find those people that you can call. I already knew them beforehand. And so maybe we can expand it to the time to build our network isn't when we need our network. I really appreciate that. And that connections piece, Maggie, you and I have talked a little bit about the communities you work with, and you mentioned specifically the kinds of organizations like the churches and the nonprofit groups. And I'm just curious, this is kind of an off the wall question, but what do you see as the impact of that? When those organizations have networks in place, when they're collaborating, when they're working with others, kind of just as like we're talking about here, and as Cheryl mentioned, that can be a goal for women business owners. Do you see that has a bigger impact across those communities that you work with?
Oh, absolutely. Just to use an example of some of the work we're doing around helping counties build out digital equity or digital inclusion plans. If groups are already working together, say have come together to identify key issues in the community, they have, deep connections within, under-resourced communities, they have connections with the county leadership, they have connections with local churches. If there are already organically built connections, a lot more can happen. So to your point, those are the communities that when crisis hit, when the pandemic hit, they were able to move rapidly to support people. And so I think you're absolutely right. Now is the time, when you're not in a crisis, to make those connections. I will say, I think we are in a crisis when it comes to broadband access and adoption, and people are being left behind. And it is one of the biggest issues of our time. So we need to catch up. But if you're able to make those connections now in your community, it will serve you well in the future.
That's great. I really appreciate that connection to, what women business owners can be doing now and that importance of community, but then also kind of bringing it back to that broadband discussion. And I think for me today, especially the broadband piece, I knew that it was something that our state was focused on, but I think the exigency, the urgency that we need to address this, the number of families and communities, and then again, just potential organizations, groups, customers for NAWBO members to connect with, how that directly affects us. I think that there's an urgency there that I maybe wasn't feeling before this conversation. Annette, I know that a lot of the work that you're doing is, again, just kind of looking at so many different communities, and as you focus from the NC Education Lottery and the Business Center, just wanted to give you a chance to chime in here about the urgency of some of these issues.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Actually, I want to chime in to say that I appreciate the work that Maggie is doing in Kaya as a result of the Andrea Harris Task Force and the resources that have gone through that. One of the committees that I serve on, or my main committee I serve on with the Andrea Harris Task Force, is the Education Opportunities Committee. And we had proposed a digital literacy program, and funding did go to that in the budget, which I think may have helped establish the office that Kaya is working in. And we are currently working with the state library system on digital literacy curriculum. And we have selected 5 libraries across the state that is going to do a digital literacy project in their communities. And these are places like Hope County and rural areas where the need is the greatest. And it will not just benefit the students, it's benefiting the parents because the curriculum, it does allow them access as well. And it does also speak to devices, because with the grant funds, there are issues with what can be allotted to these families. But we know that sometimes incentives are necessary because people don't have the confidence they need to actually access a program like this. So I just want to, say kudos to Kaya and Maggie for the work they're doing, of course, to Cheryl, to our fellow panelists. But I do think a lot of this work is something that Governor Cooper recognized and knew that it was important for our whole socioeconomic equity impact on the state going forward past the pandemic.
Absolutely. And just in case there are attendees here today who aren't familiar with the Andrea Harris Task Force, I love talking about the namesake there. So just Andrea Harris did so much, especially for women and minority-owned businesses in rural areas. As she passed away relatively recently, her legacy was just being discussed. It felt like in so many different groups, the impact that she had by supporting access to entrepreneurship and access to businesses for minority and women business owners in so many different areas. I mean, just incredible. And I hope that we can all become more familiar with the task force. It would be hard for me to ask you to summarize what the task force is doing in a couple sentences, because it's really trying to do a lot. It's very exciting.
Yes, and thank you for mentioning that. I'm certainly honored. It's a privilege to serve on the Andrea Harris Task Force and carry on her legacy. She made a major impact in my life as well as my career, personally, professionally. But I just want to encourage everyone to go to the Andrea Harris Task Force link on the governor's page or the Department of Administration. It is under the North Carolina Department of Administration. There's a specific site. There's a report there. We did do a report on the recommendations of the 5 different committees of the task force. And we are not there in name only. I just want to say that we are working hard. We meet monthly and we talk about community partners all across the state and ways that we can work together and help them access resources and make recommendations for policy changes. So you're right, Sarah, definitely cannot say it all. So I would just say, thank you for putting it there, the task force, but we have recently released another report, and I think everyone should go there and look at the recommendations, and we appreciate the support of NAWBO. Thank you.
Absolutely. And Annette, one last thing about that, aren't some of the meetings open to the public?
They are open to the public. So if you do go to that link that was posted there in the chat, you can sign up to attend as well as actually make a comment if you feel the need to do so. But I am actually looking to identify people who would come on to our committee meetings to talk about the work you're doing. So some of you may hear from me.
Love it. Okay, great. And then for anyone who wants to hear more about Andrea Harris's story, Wendy Coulter, a NAWBO member, created the North Carolina Women Business Owners Hall of Fame in 2018, and she received recognition in that Hall of Fame. And there's a video about her on the North Carolina Women Business Owner Hall of Fame website where you can see a bit about her and her legacy in North Carolina. So encourage you to check that out if you want to know a little bit more about that powerful name. We're getting close to our Q&A piece. And so I'm going to ask the panelists next, if they have any closing remarks, just things that they wanted to make sure to comment on before we close. But before I do that, let me just remind you as participants, we're going to encourage you to put additional questions in the chat, and then we're going to have a public policy committee member help to read some of the questions to our panelists. But before we do that, And we can kind of go in the backwards order from the introduction. I just want to ask each of the panelists if there's anything that they wanted to either amplify from what was said today or introduce, maybe something that we didn't have a chance to talk about. So Kaya, I might ask you to go first since I did your introduction last. Is there anything from today that you want to highlight or anything new you want to introduce before we move on to Q&A?
Yeah, I would just like to say that when we talk about the urgency of expanding broadband access, like now is the time. We have so many different funding streams coming down from the federal government that we have to find a way to maximize it. And part of that is finding out what already exists and finding ways to leverage those assets. I'll also say that our office has done the work of ranking the 100 counties across the state in order for socioeconomic status, education attainment, demographic initiatives, all of those different variables to determine what are the most, I'll say, the most needed communities to engage with first. You know, it's easy to start a pilot program in counties that already have abundance and you can just show what works well and then move on to lower socioeconomic communities. But it's even more intentional when we think about equity to start at those harder hit communities and figure out ways to curate solutions. So I'm happy to talk about that work with anyone who is interested. And if there's anyone here who is interested about learning more about our office, send me an email. I'll put my email in the chat and we can find a time to connect with the team and figure out ways that we can leverage and build our work moving forward. So I appreciate you for your time.
Love it. Kaya, that's very generous of you to share your email. Thank you. And one of the words that you said today was vigilant. And I just love bringing that kind of attitude and focus to what we're talking about today. So I have that one highlighted. Thank you.
Thank you
for that. Cheryl, I'll turn it to you next. What do you have as far as kind of closing thoughts?
Sure. So like Kaya was talking about the whole broadband piece, most people don't think that the North Carolina Rural Center has anything to do with that. And so that is actually one of the areas that we are trying to partner in to make sure that getting access in the rural areas during the pandemic. Of course, we all know the whole education system and everything else was dependent upon access to broadband. And my husband actually works with one of the cooperative programs, the Roanoke Electric Cooperative. And they were starting their program with broadband access prior to the pandemic, but the whole need was even greater. And I'm glad to hear some of the resources that are out there that Annette mentioned. But if we don't have the proper access, and I live in Greenville, North Carolina, and so it's been hard at times to get the proper internet connectivity to access some of these panels or meetings that I need to attend. Just for that very reason, we are Greenville. We are one of the largest cities within the East. And so until we make sure, just like with electricity, that it was provided to everyone across the state, across the country, we have to make sure the same is held true for the internet connectivity. And the last piece that I want to say is to make sure you just, again, utilize your resources in advance. Look into different ways that you can help yourself to help your business, whether that's finances, whether that is connectivity within your communities, partner with your banks, partner with different organizations. And I love the piece about Andrea Harris because she was just a fire in itself. And there is no way to describe her in just a few words, but just like the task force, you can't describe it. That's how her life was. It's just indescribable. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Cheryl. And thank you for bringing in that piece about Greenville. And that is so true. And something that you highlighted today that I know I'm going to be taking with me is you repeated that idea of, one size doesn't fit all. And we need to remember that as we talk about these different programs and kind of the ecosystems that they're connected in. So I'm really taking that with me today. Thank you so much for all your inputs today. We're gonna next, let's see, Maggie, what do you have as far as closing comments?
I feel like Kaya and Cheryl really took many of my points, which was awesome. So I don't have to make them. And it's great to be with such wonderful women on this panel. I will say, Broadband access and digital inclusion is an everyone problem. It's not a rural problem. It's a rural, it's an urban, it's a suburban problem. And we need everyone at the table, including women business owners. I'm going to put in the chat, we have some upcoming workshops about Digital Inclusion 101, Introduction to Building a Digital Inclusion Plan. And I'd love for anyone interested to reach out to me to join one of these workshops. I will note Wake County and Raleigh does not have a digital inclusion plan. And we have a long ways to go. We are not one of the most under-resourced communities, but there are people in Raleigh that are being left behind. And so we need you at the table and would love to engage with you in the future. So I'll put those in the chat, but thank you so much for inviting me to be on here today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Maggie. And I wrote down your term of just move rapidly. This is really something we need to do quickly. So taking that with us today, thank you so much. And Annette, we started with you and we started with a celebration of women business owners. Now we can kind of end before we jump into the Q&A with just a celebration of all the great points from today. You really helped us to champion women business owners in a lot of what you shared. So just want to thank you for that. What do you have for us as far as closing thoughts?
Well, I'll keep it short and I'll just wrap up the celebration by encouraging more women to start businesses. I think the women who are part of NAWBO should share their story more and help others feel empowered. And I think a lot of the things that Cheryl has said about women feeling encouraged or feeling hesitancy, I think NAWBO can play a really great role in empowering people to start more businesses. I know that pivoting was not easy. Actually, pivoting is a luxury. And if you do not have the resources and the capital, it's hard to be innovative. It's hard to figure out how to identify gaps and then determine what path you can take if your existing business line is not marketable anymore. So I just want to thank NAWBO for all that you're doing and just even for the partnership that I've been afforded from the North Carolina Education Lottery side. But honored to be a part of this panel and the panelists, knowing all of what you're doing and how I'm connected to it. I'm looking forward to being in touch with all of you. And thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you, Annette. That was beautiful. Couldn't have had a better ending to the panelist portion. Let's turn now to the chat space and hear some questions from our audience. We have support here from a member of NAWBO's Public Policy Committee, Danny Choi. So Danny, thank you so much for helping us with this part. Do you have any questions that you'd like to bring in from the chat space? Oh, you might be muted. Let's see, we got your screen. There you go. Perfect.
Hi, how's everybody doing today? I'm Danny Choi. I would love to see your questions in the chat if you have anything. And yeah, feel free. We had such a great panel. Thank you so much for everybody. That was wonderful. Any questions? I mean, I have a question actually.
Perfect. Go ahead.
If I can go ahead. So we talked a lot about childcare mentioned as a necessity. Personally, I'm concerned about family care in general. And do you know anybody who's advocating on the behalf of family care or looking more in depth at issues on the state level about that?
It's interesting. So that question of elder care, and Danny, I can share just from reading in some of the infrastructure bills that we mentioned today, the ones that at the federal level are being discussed. There's two right now, and the second one that has more policies about supporting families does specifically call out elder care as part of this infrastructure umbrella and the importance not just of childcare, but also of elder care. So I think that's a really interesting perspective for us to consider too. And again, just like with childcare, the discussion isn't necessarily as far as for women business owners, it's not just that the burden of elder care more likely falls to women, which is true, but we don't talk about it just because of that. We talk about it because as women business owners, the economy and the success of the economy directly affects us. And we know that more people will be able to participate in that economy successfully and engage with our businesses successfully if that issue is addressed. And so seeing that discussed as infrastructure in that second bill is, I think, a step toward that. As far as things that are going on at the state level, it would be interesting. Do any of you as panelists have any ideas about programs you've seen?
Well, I'll just kick it off by saying, hey, it was really great to see Senator Jackson on here. And I don't know if he's still here, but I'd love to hear some feedback from him. The Council for Women is certainly an advocate for elder care. We're an advocate for the whole family care. And that is something that you'll notice or see in our reports. But I do know that the whole care economy is in crisis again. And we are, many of us and many women business owners are taking care of their elderly parents. So I think because Medicaid is an issue, Social Security is an issue, those are things that I do hope get passed in the infrastructure bill. But I'm happy to identify some other advocates around the state who may be advocating for elder care. And I think it's an important topic.
Absolutely. And I think it's an infrastructure topic from the economy standpoint that we discussed, but also the discussion of more facilities as we talk about the wait time for certain facilities and things like that. So definitely something, Danny, great question. I think it's definitely going to be something we see more of in the infrastructure space. Danny, any other questions popping up?
Yeah, we have a couple more actually. So what are some of the best practices around the country for childcare funding at the moment?
Oh, that's a good one. And, you know, we mentioned earlier this idea that Families Forward North Carolina and their idea for childcare subsidies, this idea that we need to be supporting families who do use childcare. They have some interesting policies that they're putting forward. That's an organization that I know we mentioned the caucus that's being formed in the legislature that has members of the House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats that are specifically looking at early education. Panelists, what are some other organizations or groups or policies that come to mind?
Prevent Child Abuse in North Carolina. I know they are a huge advocate for child care, parenting, and things of that nature. So Sharon Hirsch is awesome and can definitely help you with any of your questions and needs.
Thank you, Cheryl.
I think there's an association, the North Carolina Early Childhood Foundation, definitely puts out a lot of articles and around advocacy for child care and had a report recently. I think they could be very helpful if someone's doing research and trying to determine what to do about it, because most of the time when these advocacy organizations put out a report, they have a set of recommendations. And that's one of the ways that you all as a public policy committee could be advocates, is call those legislators and say, hey, here's what we found out. Here's what we know. Here's what the research shows.
Absolutely. And that's definitely what we want to do, is to help funnel that information to the folks who are making those policy decisions. I think another one that came to mind, Annette, as you mentioned, that is Smart Start. I know that's an organization in North Carolina that also at the county level has done a lot. And those Smart Start programs are a great resource for families who are looking for some pre-K support and programs to do for pre-K. I don't think that extends all the way to early childhood, but that's another organization that absolutely would be a good one to look into.
I know we only have a couple minutes left, but we do have a question from Lisa. Do you see cross-issue coordination at the local level about how to spend American Rescue dollars?
Address that one. So as I mentioned before, we are in an unprecedented time with the amount of funding that's coming down from the federal level. And we've seen that a lot of counties come to our office and say, what are we supposed to do with this? Is there a strategic plan? Do you have a framework? So to that question, I would say contact our office. Let's find time to sit down and consult and figure out best steps moving forward. We want to support these communities in any way possible. So having a dialogue or open conversation is the first way to do that.
You already put your email out there, so that's fantastic.
Yes, email me. Don't be scared. I promise. I'm great.
Yeah, I agree with Kia. The amount of funding that's out here now that are flooding the streets, I mean, it can be a little confusing. Of course, most people want grant dollars, but there's a way to leverage other resources to make sure that you're not tapped out. And a lot of times what we're seeing with the community banks is they have all of these deposits and they'll have a pipeline, but at the same time, people are just hesitant and not sure what to use and what resources. And so being that we are not just in the community bank space, we are actually partnering with the CDFIs, which are our community development financial institutions, whereby they're serving like at the ground level, really more so than community banks, in ensuring that people that have not been included are included, and sitting down to be able to walk you through the process of different resources and how to take leverage of those. It is amazing. So if you're in one of those communities, I would highly suggest that you either, number one, reach out to your community bank and or partner organizations, but definitely tap into some of these community development financial institutions. They can be a huge help.
Cheryl, something you just said there reminded me of the broadband discussion when Maggie was talking about how it's not just laying the broadband, laying the fiber, if you will, but also making sure people have access to the tools and then the digital literacy. It's the same with financing. It's not just having the dollars there, but also making sure people are aware of the tools and how to access that. So it's kind of a beautiful parallel between those two things, and really helps us as business owners understand our responsibilities. We think about being advocates or examples for what's out there. I want to continue this conversation all day. I love talking to you all so much. This has been such a great discussion. If you have more questions, we'd love to keep hearing them. We're going to do breakout rooms in a little bit to help with networking, so you get a chance to talk to some of the faces in the room. But for now, we need to wrap up so that as a NAWBO Greater Raleigh Business Luncheon, we can hear some closing remarks. We want to make sure to leave time for that. One last time, thank you so much to our panelists who brought their incredible insights and experience to us today. And thank you to the members who were here for this conversation. You are truly champion women business owners, and we really appreciate you pushing this conversation forward. Thank you all so much. I gotta get pretty.
Sarah, thank you so much to our panelists. We are so delighted that you came today and imparted us with so much information. What an amazing conversation. As we think about infrastructure and all the information that you have provided today, we hope that our members, our guests, you have heard something today that will propel you, if you haven't already, to start your business. You know you're supposed to do it. And if you're already in business, we hope that you've gotten the information to help you to continue to run and grow. As we think about infrastructure and our closing and the information and all the systems and infrastructures that you've heard, a lot of soft infrastructures, systems that you've heard, these are all fundamental to what we do, the foundation of ensuring success of women business-owned organizations. And NAWBO is one of those organizations, and we generate grassroots and governmental initiatives to promote more infrastructure to support women businesses. We have a lot of power within our reach to make sure that various domains of local systems are working together. Incubators and accelerators are refining their practices and developing more effective approaches than ever to support us as women entrepreneurs. There are opportunities to create policies and programs that promote infrastructure, which we call the Great Economic Equalizer. As we wrap up the public policy, as Sarah said, we would love to continue the conversation by way of a call to action. And I would like to say, as the public policy chair, every NAWBO member, every NAWBO Greater Raleigh member, you are automatically a member of public policy, of the Public Policy Committee. We challenge you, we charge you to get involved. The environment for women business owners today is probably the best we've ever had, but that doesn't mean it can't get better, says one CEO. One way to work to that end is for us as NAWBO Greater Raleigh members to remain engaged so that we become even more unified advocates. We can also take fight take the fight directly to elected officials. So many decisions made at all levels of government can be either obstacles or opportunities for us as business owners. One of our entrepreneurial colleagues once said, "It is important to stay engaged so that those representing us understand the consequences of the laws and regulations they put forth. Government is a two-sided endeavor. Our elected officials have the responsibility to represent us to the best of their ability, and we have the responsibility to remain aware and engaged to help them and encourage them to do so. If you're new or if you're not so new, and if you're wanting to know, how do I get started with public policy? I encourage you to go out to NAWBO Greater Raleigh's website, and there is a spotlight on the HR 5050 bill that I talked about earlier. And many of my notes were taken from that spotlight. As we continue to give you this call to action, there are several things that we want you to consider. The NAWBO public policy posts that we have every Thursday, we challenge you to look for those on LinkedIn, Facebook, and other social channels, and read those and take those to heart. We also have a conversation and a social coming up with elected officials later this year. And next year, you will hear about a public policy reception and a day at the state capitol. Before we switch into our networking session, again, Sarah, thank you so much. Panelists, we are so grateful for your time today. We want to thank you, and we have already coordinated with you to get your gift, and we thank you again. And we want to encourage you to complete your survey. And Sarah, a surprise. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, thank you
Yes.
so much. These are beautiful.
Yes, thank you.
Wow, and so I think a few of our panelists locally are gonna be getting something like this as well. North Raleigh Florist, thank you so much.
Thank you. And this concludes the public policy section of our luncheon. Julie, yes, I got that written right here in front of me. So Julie, I'm gonna ask you to come now and tell us about the October program. And also you can get us set to switch over into our networking section. Thank you.
Hi, so I want to invite you to our October workshop. It's going to be on October 28th from 11:30 to 1. It's called Where Personal and Business Branding Meet, Conveying an Authentic You in the Marketplace. So if you're out meeting people one-on-one, networking at an event, or making videos for your social media feeds, and you're not really sure how to convey yourself authentically, so your brand is really true to who you are, our panelists are going to help you know how to do that better. So we have some great panelists. We have Zy Floyd from Red Hat, Sharon Delaney McLeod from Walk West, Virginia Parker from Bank of America, and moderated by our own Pam Williams of PromoQuest. So we're looking forward to this event. You can find more information and register at nawbo-raleigh.org on the events page. So yeah, be sure to register today. We look forward to seeing you all there, and invite a friend as well. Also, next, we're going to turn it over to Miss Wendy Gates Corbett. She's going to talk about another really great benefit of being a NAWBO member. So Wendy.
Hi, everybody, and thank you all for the panelists. I came away with so much information, and one of my biggest insights came from Sarah. The idea of getting a business line of credit, that is something I had not considered, and I'm going to talk to my credit union. So thank you all. One of the reasons I joined Greater Raleigh NAWBO is because I'd heard about peer groups, and they are a key area of focus for us this year. Peer groups are groups of 6 to 10 women who are premier members of NAWBO, We get together on a monthly basis and we serve as each other's board of advisors, sounding boards, advice givers, cheerleaders, and referral sources. I have been part of a peer group for about a year now. Right now, there are 3 peer groups, and we are likely to start at least one more. The peer groups meet at different times of day, and they meet in different locations. Although right now, I think we're all meeting virtually. So if you are interested in creating an ongoing relationship where you can get trusted advice, insight, guidance, brainstorming, support, you can receive and give all of that, please feel free to reach out to me or Sarah, you're still here, Sarah Forney, or Penny McGee with any questions. We will get you set up within a peer group. I know for me, I'm sorry, just to wrap up, I know for me, being part of a peer group is one of the strengths that I love about NAWBO. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I will put my information in chat, and I am going to turn it over to our esteemed president, Emily Parks.
Oh, thank you so very much, Wendy. We appreciate you sharing your experience. And I love how each one of our peer groups is able to provide our members with their own personal board of advisors to keep us headed in the right directions with our businesses. And y'all, wasn't this an amazing program today? Thank you so very much to each of our panelists. I love how there was synergy between our mission as well as what was covered during the program today. And it all tied in so nicely with our corporate partners offerings, our community partners offerings, as well as upcoming programs, our public policy committee's work, and of course, our professional development with our peer groups. So thank you to everyone who participated today. It's awfully wonderful synergy in the fact that today is actually September 22nd, which is American Business Women's Day, which honors the achievements of business women across the nation. Although, as we saw today during the panel, there still is much work left to be done. I do think we've also highlighted some really amazing accomplishments and fabulous forward progress that is worth celebrating. This day, American Business Women's Day, brings together diverse populations of business women to collaborate and network, which is one of the accomplishments, collaborating and networking, that we as NAWBO Greater Raleigh members strive to fulfill on a daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly basis. Which brings us to our fantastic breakout rooms. Our chapter administrator has taken the time to go ahead and assign everyone to a breakout room. We also checked the panelists and divided them up amongst the different breakout rooms so that you can do a deeper dive, not only into getting to know one another, but also what was covered during today's infrastructure as the great economic equalizer discussion. So please continue with what we've covered during today's program, get to know each other a little bit better, and enjoy the breakout sessions for networking. All you'll have to do is you get a pop-up that says, I would like to join this room, and you'll be whisked away into cyberspace. So, and also there will be a option in the lower right-hand corner of your screen where you can pick to go to another breakout room as our breakout sessions continue. And we will have our breakout rooms open until 1 o'clock. So for the full time remaining in our business luncheon timeframe, we hope that you will stick around, enjoy the networking, and continue these great conversations. Thank you all so much for being here today. We look forward to seeing you at October's Get to Know NAWBO event, as well as the workshop. Make it a great day.